conference or the presentation today, and we also have John Petroskas and Heidi Sandberg, also with DHS, and I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more in their area of the presentation. So that is our agenda for today. We'll do some updates from DHS and other state agencies at the very end, so feel free to stay tuned for those. Again, send questions when you get a chance, and we'll feel free to stop and go through them at some point. Just a reminder that the forums take place about every other month on the third Monday, 1:30 to 3:30, and all the presentation and materials are available post-session on mn.hb101.org in the Partners and Providers tab, and we will try to have those up today or tomorrow. We also have a steering committee that helped devise these forums and plan some of the topics and agenda. With that, I'm going to hand it over to John, and he is going to go through some of the Minnesota Supplemental Aid Housing Assistance basics and maybe some of the details too. So thanks, John, and go for it.
Great, thanks, Allie. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to talk about Minnesota Supplemental Aid, and I will talk more specifically about housing assistance, which is one of the MSA special need programs. So I'm just going to dive in. If you have questions, please feel free to write in and ask, and Allie will pass those questions on to me while we're presenting, and I'll take some breaks to try to answer questions along the way. So let's get started. It's important to know when you're talking about Minnesota Supplemental Aid that it is a program that is intended to supplement the income of people who receive SSI, or Supplemental Security Income. And I'm assuming that pretty much everybody in this forum knows what SSI is, but for those who might not, I would like to, oops, somebody says get closer to the microphone. Can you turn the phone to face me?
Yep.
Sorry if I'm quiet.
We got disconnected from earlier. Do you want to just switch seats with me?
I can switch seats with you?
Yep.
Sorry, everybody. This is a little bit awkward setup for webinar since we're sharing a little tiny space here. Can everybody hear me now? Is that better? Great. Okay, so we're talking about MSA. It's a supplement to SSI. I just want to remind everybody what Supplemental Security Income is, because if you don't know what it is, it's hard to understand what MSA is. So SSI is a federal cash benefit, and it's intended for people who have a disability that keeps them from working. And it is it comes in different flavors, but for most people, the amount of SSI is going to be the same no matter what. And for single individual people, it's $735 a month. For couples, it's $1,103 a month. That changes, you know, generally every year at the beginning of the year because of cost of living adjustments. The supplemental security income is the benefit type that people get if they either have not worked or have not worked enough qualifying quarters in their lifetime to qualify for SSDI, which is the Social Security Disability Insurance Program, and that is the program that you get if you work enough quarter credits. Now, some people receive both SSI and SSDI. They are dually eligible for those two programs. Maybe a person who worked enough to qualify for SSDI, but their income in their lifetime was very low, so their benefit, which is based on their income, is also low. They might receive SSI to bring them up to that $735 a month standard. So some people receive SSI, some people receive SSDI, and some people receive both. I just wanted to put that out there. That is how this works. So Minnesota Supplemental Aid, or MSA, is a monthly cash supplement to that SSI payment. For most people on MSA, they are SSI recipients. There are about 31,000 people each month who receive MSA, and this is a program that the state agrees to fund. We have a maintenance of effort agreement with the Social Security Administration that basically we are promising Social Security Administration that we will continue to fund the MSA program. And this is it is meant to increase the incomes of people who receive SSI or who are on SSDI but just have very, very low incomes. So this is a cash supplement program. to be eligible for MSA, you have to meet a couple of pretty basic criteria. You have to be over the age of 18 and receiving SSI in any amount. So a person who receives even $1 of SSI every month is potentially eligible for MSA. Or if you don't receive even $1 of SSI because you have income from another source, sorry, we're switching around a little bit. About 95% of people who receive MSA are SSI recipients. There are a handful of people, a relatively small number, who receive MSA even though they don't receive SSI. And the reason that they get MSA is because their benefits from other sources, like from SSDI, are very low. They have low enough income, even though they don't get SSI, to still qualify for MSA. But like I said, that's not very many people. Most people on MSA are SSI recipients. Like I said, about 95%. And I want to point something out, actually. I just realized on this last slide that some of you might be wondering about. If you look up at the top of the slide, the title part of it says MSA eligibility criteria, CM 1309. I presume many of you are familiar with the DHS combined manual, but for those of you who are not, the rules for our cash programs are collected in one place, which is called the DHS combined manual. And I, for your convenience, have decided to reference the sections of the combined manual that contain the information on the slides. So if you wanted to go to the source and actually look at what our combined manual says, you could go to it. And so you'll see CM 1309. Each of the slides, or many of the slides that we're going to go through today, will have a reference to the combined manual. So if you've been wondering what that is, you can find the DHS combined manual by Googling DHS combined manual or MN DHS combined manual, and you'll find it a very helpful resource for understanding the rules of our program. So I will try where I can to direct you to the part of the combined manual that has the relevant rules. So 1309 for eligibility. MSA is a program where we compare a person's income, an eligible person's income, to an assistance standard. And if the person's income is less than that assistance standard, we pay them the difference. That's how MSA works as a supplement to the person's income. If the person's income is greater than the assistance standard, we don't pay them MSA. They're ineligible for the program because their income is too high. So to get MSA, you have to have income that is less than the assistance standard that applies to you. And there are different assistance standards. The one that we apply the most often is for people who are living alone. So let's say you have an SSI recipient who lives in their own home or apartment in the community. They receive $735 a month from SSI, and that's their only source of income. They live on their own. We subtract that income from the assistance standard for a person living alone, and we pay the person the difference. And at the risk of going into too much math, I'll just say the assistance standard, as you can see here, for a single person living alone is $796. We disregard $20 of the person's income. So we take $20 away from that $735 that they receive, and we pay the difference. $735 minus 20 is $715. We subtract that from $796, and that's how we come up with the $81 that we pay to a person on MSA. And you'll see on the next page, we have different assistance standards for different circumstances, but when you subtract a typical person's income from the assistance standard, we end up with a couple different benefits, the most common of which is $81 a month. And that's probably the number most people here are familiar with for MSA. There are other assistance standards and different incomes, so we do end up paying sometimes different amounts. The most common amounts are listed here. So we pay out $81 for a single person, $111 for a couple, for example, two people who are both on SSI, maybe living together, would get $111. Or a person who lives in a nursing facility and only gets $30 in SSI would get $67 in MSA. We want to bring them up to have at least $97 a month in income, so we give them some MSA in addition to their SSI. And one of the things about MSA that people sometimes don't understand is this assistance standard can change. If you qualify for some of the MSA special need programs, we increase the assistance standard. So for example, we might add money to the assistance standard, and then because you're eligible for more, we would subtract your income from that higher number, and then you would get more MSA. I hope that explanation makes sense. But these assistance standards are kind of a threshold. If people qualify for any of the MSA special need programs, we add additional an additional amount to the assistance standard, and then the person is eligible for more MSA as a supplement to their income. And I'm going to talk to you about some of those special need programs very briefly right now. So we have the cash component of the MSA program, the regular cash, that's the $81 or $111 or $67. And then we have these special need programs that can increase a person's income. There are 6 special need programs, and I'm not going to go into detail about them, but they're listed here. The most common special need program is the special diet program. So people who have a medically prescribed special diet can get additional money each month to help them meet their nutritional needs. People with guardians, conservators, or representative payees can get additional MSA money each month to offset the cost of receiving those services. Some people receive MSA special need payments for intermittent home repairs or to buy things for the home that they live in. And then we have this special need program called housing assistance. It used to be called the shelter needy allowance, but we got rid of that language. Now we call it MSA housing assistance. And like I said, we have different, these are all addressed in different sections of the DHS Combined Manual, and you can find the references here for your convenience. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about housing assistance because that's the program that we're talking about today. To be eligible for MSA housing assistance, a person has to be eligible for MSA, which makes sense. This is a special need program. It builds on top of the MSA cash benefit. And so the person, obviously, they have to be eligible for MSA. They don't necessarily have to be receiving MSA. They just have to be eligible for it. And by eligible, I mean they have to either be an SSI recipient or they would be receiving SSI, but for income that they're receiving from another source, like from SSDI. So first of all, you have to be eligible for MSA. This is the first of the 5 requirements for housing assistance. And this gets a little bit confusing, so just hang with me. I'll go over the different requirements, and then I'll go back and I'll recap them in more detail. But a person needs to be eligible for MSA. They also have to have housing costs that exceed 40% of their gross monthly income. Housing assistance is a benefit that's intended to help people pay for housing in the community if they don't have enough resources to do that on their own. So we have to document that the person has income or has housing costs that are burdensome to them. The person has to agree to apply for rental assistance, and they have to be under the age of 65 when they apply for the program. So I'm going to go back over this. Again, you have to be eligible for MSA. We talked about that in a little more detail. Your housing costs have to be greater than 40% of your gross monthly income. By housing costs, we mean either the rent that you pay, the mortgage that you pay, the utilities that you pay, or if you live with another person, your share of the rent and the utility expenses. 40% of your gross monthly income is your income before we add any additional MSA money to your budget. So let's say you have a person who's on they get SSI, they get $735 a month, and they've been receiving that $81 cash payment. We don't count the $81 when we're comparing the housing costs to their income. We just compare the person's housing costs to the SSI that they receive. 40% of $735, the SSI benefit amount, is about $294. So this is a threshold that's not very hard to meet. Most people statewide probably have housing costs that exceed $294 if you look at what their rent or their mortgage and their utilities would be. So this is not a difficult requirement for people to meet. But remember, again, 40% of the income that they have is before we add any MSA money to their income. People have to either apply for rental assistance, or if they can't apply for rental assistance because maybe a waiting list is closed, they can agree to apply for it later if the waiting list were to reopen. And by apply for rental assistance, we don't mean apply for public housing or something where you'd have to move into a high-rise or a congregate setting. We mean the kind of rental assistance that would allow a person to continue to live in the community where they choose. So Section 8 or another portable rental subsidy would be an example of the kind of rental assistance we're talking about. If a person can't apply for rental assistance because the waiting list is closed, they just have to promise to apply when the waiting list in their area might open. And we have a form, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that would allow people to say, this is, I have applied or I will apply. If a person is living in their own home that they own, they are not required to apply for rental assistance. Likewise, if the person would be ineligible for rental assistance, even if their name came to the top of the waiting list, they also don't need to apply. So remember, apply for rental assistance if you can. If you can't, or if it's not relevant to that person, then they're not required to do that. you have to be under the age of 65 when you apply for the benefit. You can continue to receive MSA housing assistance after your 65th birthday, which we call grandfathering, but you do have to be under the age of 65 when you apply and when you start to get MSA housing assistance. If you have a client, for example, who's 68 and they've never received MSA housing assistance, it's too late for them to receive that benefit, unfortunately. But there are other housing resources for seniors, and so they have, that would be an option for them. But I think that goes into detail enough on these first 4 requirements. You have to meet all of those 4 conditions in order to qualify for MSA housing assistance. And you have to meet one of the following criteria. And this is where it gets a little tricky because people think, oh, I have to do all these things and or, and it's just confusing. You have to do all the things on the last slide and one of the things on this slide. And those 3 things are either relocate to the community from an institution, basically into your own housing that you want to pay for with MSA housing assistance, or be eligible for PCA services, or be a waiver recipient living on your own. I'm going to go through each of these 3 things in more detail. Remember that you only need to meet one of these criteria, not all 3, just one of these criteria. Relocating to the community. This is a little bit of a tricky one. We define an institution for this purpose as one of only 4 different things, sorry. A hospital, nursing facility, a regional treatment center, or an intermediate care facility for people with developmental disabilities. Those are the 4 things that we consider institutions. And for MSA housing assistance, we also include IRTS facilities, or intensive residential treatment services. So there are 5 settings from which a person could relocate to the community from: hospital, nursing facility, regional treatment center, inpatient, ICFTD, or IRTS. People always ask, are there any other kinds of institutions that you could relocate from? And no, the answer is no. It's just these 5 things that are listed here. The 4 things that I said were institutions and an IRTS. Prison is not an institution. That's a question that we get all the time. For our purposes, it is just these 5 things. What does it mean to relocate to the community? Well, that's a little bit vague. We do not require that a person moves directly from one of these institutions into a place that they want to live, that they intend to use MSA housing assistance to pay for. There can be a break in a stay. So a person was maybe in a nursing facility, they moved out into a rehab facility, and then they tried living on their own someplace and it didn't work, and maybe they need to go to a different place. I look at it as a bit of a relocation, as a bit of a process, not an exact A to B transition that a person has to make. But if you're going to be advocating for people to receive MSA housing assistance, you should show some nexus between the place that they're coming from and the place that they're going to. Now, I always like to joke, I was born in a hospital, but I'm not still relocating to the community from the hospital after 47 years. So you have to be able to show that the place you were and the place you're going have some kind of connection in time. I don't know exactly what that means. Does that mean 2 weeks, 2 months? That might be where your advocacy skills come in. So relocating to the community or eligible for personal care assistance services. Eligible means just that. It does not mean that you are receiving PCA services. It just means that you have been assessed and determined to be eligible for PCA. Any amount of PCA services that you're eligible for will qualify you. It could be 1 hour a week, 1 unit a month. It doesn't matter at all. You don't have to be receiving the service. You just need to have been determined to be eligible for it. Or you can be a waiver recipient, and it doesn't matter what waiver, but you do have to be actually receiving the services. There's no test that says how much you have to be receiving, but you do have to be receiving those waivered services. So again, any waiver in any amount, but you actually do have to be receiving those services. So let's recap this. To be eligible for MSA housing assistance, you have to meet all of the conditions on the prior slide: eligibility for MSA, the high housing costs, the application for rental assistance, under the age of 65, and one of the things from the next slide: relocating to the community, eligible for PCA, or a waiver recipient. And if you go through this application process and you're determined to be eligible for MSA housing assistance, what does this do for you? Well, it increases your income substantially. Let's take the example of a person who's on SSI and they receive $735 a month. They're eligible to receive $81 in MSA and an additional $194 a month in MSA housing assistance. And that's $275 a month total that they would receive in MSA, which is almost a 40% increase in their income over their SSI benefit alone. And they're going to continue to be eligible for some SNAP benefits, food support benefits, although it's not going to be very much. But this basically, MSA housing assistance, brings the person's income to $1,010 a month, which is way more money than $735. And this could be a real game changer for a client who just receives SSI and needs to find housing in the community. It's very difficult to afford your own housing on $735, but it's, at least having $1,000 gives you a lot more choices. That's one of the reasons that we like MSA housing assistance. This benefit is paid directly to the individual client. It's not like GRH benefits that are paid to a provider or a vendor on behalf of the eligible person. Unless the MSA recipient has a representative payee, these benefits are paid directly to the person, and they're paid in the form of cash placed on the client's EBT card at the beginning of the month, and the client can choose to spend the resources however they want. MSA housing assistance is intended to lower a person's high housing costs, but there's no requirement that the client spend it on that. So if they're eligible, they can choose to use the money in the way that they want to. MSA benefits can be, there is a question here, can the grant be paid directly to the landlord? MSA benefits can, at the client's request, be vendor paid. So that's something that the client might want to explore with the county. I want to talk briefly about some future changes to MSA housing assistance that are going to slightly tweak the things that I just told you, and then I want to give you a couple tips about applying for MSA housing assistance. First of all, right now, you heard me say that the MSA housing assistance benefit is $194 a month. We base MSA housing assistance on whatever the maximum single adult SNAP monthly allotment is. So right now, the most SNAP benefits that a person can receive for a single adult is $194 a month. When the SNAP benefit changes, the MSA housing assistance benefit changes. Now, in the future, because of some recent legislative changes, that is going to change. Effective July 1st of 2020, we are going to tie the MSA housing assistance benefit to the Supplemental Security Income Federal Benefit Rate, or SSI FBR. And right now, that's $735 a month. We'll base the MSA housing assistance payment on 1/2 of the SSI FBR instead of on the SNAP benefit. So right now, if we made that change today, we would increase MSA housing assistance from $194 to $367.50, which is half of the $735 SSI FBR. Now, again, this is not going to change until July 1st of 2020, so we're just giving you notice that this is something that's going to happen in the future. But that will really be a significant increase in the housing assistance benefit and will increase people with disabilities' housing choices quite a lot. Another change that's going to happen July 1st of 2020 is that housing supports, which is what was our new name for what we used to call the Group Residential Housing Program, settings will be added to the list of places from which a person can relocate to the community. So remember I said before there were 5 places a person could relocate from. Those 4 places that we consider to be institutions, hospital, nursing, regional treatment, ICFDD, or an IRTS facility, we're going to add housing support settings, or what we used to call group residential housing settings, to that. So if a person is leaving a group home, for example, and they might be eligible for housing assistance if they hadn't been in the past. So again, this is a future change, but it's important to remember that these are things that are going to happen. I want to give you some practical tips for applying for MSA housing assistance, because a lot of people are not familiar with this program. They might be wondering, how do I help a client apply for this, or how do I apply for this on my own? Well, like all of our cash programs at DHS, you have to apply for them. Eligibility for MSA and for MSA housing assistance is not automatic. When a client gets approved for SSI, we don't automatically start issuing them MSA benefits. The client has to come to the county to apply for those benefits. So, and as much as I would like it to be automatic, it isn't. People do have to apply, and you apply the same way you do for any of our other programs, using our combined application form or applying on applymn.org online. On this slide, I've created links to the forms that you would use to apply, so you can see the combined application form, our DHS 5223, is linked here. If you click on this, it'll take you to the form. The client needs to make sure that they are applying for cash programs. There are 4 boxes on the front page of the CAF. cash, food, emergency. 3 boxes, sorry. You want to make sure that you're applying for cash. You need to tell the financial worker who takes the application that you are applying for housing assistance. Make it easy for the worker by telling them exactly what you want and why you think you or your client might be eligible for it. I recommend that advocates attach a note to the front of the combined application form when they drop it off or when they send it in or fax it, and tell the financial worker you want your client to be screened for MSA housing assistance. Make it easy for the worker to know what you're looking for. This is a program that is not in very, very wide use. There are probably fewer than 1,000 recipients of MSA housing assistance in any month. So a lot of financial workers are not familiar with this program, and you need to make it easy for them to know what to do. You can document your client's shelter expenses in a number of different ways. People always ask, well, how do I show that? You can show it either by sending in a copy of a lease or a rental agreement that the client has, or by having the client's landlord sign the shelter verification form, which spells out what the client's rent obligation is, what utilities they're obligated to pay, and that would allow the financial worker to make sure that they have met that 40% threshold. Remember, we talked about how they have to have housing costs that exceed 40% of their gross monthly income. If you're wondering about that, how would I show that I've applied for rental assistance, we do have a form for that, the DHS verification of application for rental assistance. There are 2 boxes on this form. One, you can say, I already applied for rental assistance, here's where I applied and when, or you can check the bottom of the form where it says, I can't apply now, but I will apply if a waiting list ever opens up in the future. So this is a requirement that the client has to meet this, show this at the beginning of their eligibility for MSA, and this form is a way for them to do it. Like all of our other cash programs, clients do have to have an interview for MSA and for MSA housing assistance, but it does not need to be face-to-face. If it's more convenient for your client, you can, on the CAF or through an attached note, request that the client have a telephone interview with the financial worker so the worker can verify the information on their application by telephone. The client doesn't have to go to the county office in order to do that. And that's just something to remember for all of our cash programs. The face-to-face interview is not required. You can do a telephone interview as an alternative. So those are some helpful tips, I think, that would help a person receive have their application screened in the right way. And yeah, let's see. Should I stop and take some questions? Does anybody have questions?
It looks like we have one question about if you can still receive the full MSA housing assistance even if your SSI is reduced due to earned income. How does it work when you have earned income for housing assistance?
Well, this is a great question. What does it do to my housing assistance benefit or to MSA benefits if I go to work? Heidi will go through some examples in the next presentation of what happens when people work. But I will just tell you, as long as an individual who is getting SSI receives even $1 of SSI, we don't care how much they make from work. That's between them and the Social Security Administration. We don't budget a single cent of the money that they earn as long as they continue to receive at least $1 of SSI. We continue to use the $735 SSI FBR as the amount that we budget in that person's budget. So if they're working, they're receiving even $1 of SSI, we're going to continue to use that $796 assistance standard, and we'll subtract $735 from that amount. So work for the SSI recipient who continues to receive SSI will have no impact on their MSA eligibility or their housing assistance eligibility. Now, for the person on MSA who doesn't get SSI, that's a little bit different story, and I don't know if you have an example of that, Heidi, in your presentation that you'll talk about, but we really need to then look at what is the total income that the person has. Their earnings would be subject to our earned income disregard of $65 and half of every remaining, half of all the remainder. So if a person earned money and they weren't on SSI, we would have to figure out how much they had, compare it to that assistance standard, and determine whether they were over the income limit for MSA or under it. So sorry, that's a general answer, but yes.
So if they go into 1619B, do you know about that?
I do. Oh, that's a question. Okay. If they go to 1619B, that's still disability status. So we would, again, we would be, I'd have to look at that actually.
So another question is about if you can find out if you qualify for MSA housing assistance even if you're not housed or renting yet.
You could not receive it, of course, because you wouldn't have housing costs that exceeded 40% of your income. You could ask the financial worker to determine whether the client would be eligible if they had certain housing costs. Let's say you knew that the client wanted to move in to a place where the rent was $600, and you could get a shelter verification form from the landlord saying this is what the expense would be. The client, the worker could then tell the client this is what you would be eligible for if certain circumstances were met. Hope that answers that question.
Yeah, similarly, there was a question, are you able to help people get into their own housing? And so you're not eligible to receive it until you're actually in your own housing, but you can contact the county and get information about it.
They can even apply for it in advance of moving into the housing, but they can't actually receive the benefit. And I know that that creates some problems for people who are looking for an apartment. Maybe the landlord wants documentation of the income that the client will have. This is a situation where I don't think we have figured this out quite perfectly yet.
So another question about if you are living in a home of a family member, can the family, and paying rent to the family member, can the family member sign off on the shelter verification form?
Yeah, this gets complicated, and it actually references the slides that I was hoping to get to if I had a couple extra minutes to talk about what the effect of living arrangement is on MSA eligibility, and maybe it would make sense for me to talk about that as part of that. Allie, do we have time for me to do that?
Yes, so we'll get into that. It's complicated, so we'll get into that part a little bit later.
Extremely complicated, and I'll do my best.
So then there's another question about the application process. Somebody applied and they sent in their verification of application for rental assistance. They're already on MSA. They never requested to be screened specifically for MSA housing assistance. What should they do in that situation?
I don't know that I have enough information to say what they should do. Did you just do this? Did you do this and you sent it off into a black hole and the county never responded? They wondered why you were sending them this paperwork. I personally believe that when you wrap everything up in a nice package and you hand it to the county financial worker, it's a lot easier for them to say yes or no. I would not send things for MSA housing assistance in piecemeal and expect that the worker or workers are going to figure out what you're asking for. I would put everything together at one time and send it in and say, here's why I'm sending you all this. Here's how this client is eligible for this program. Here are how they've met all the requirements. I wonder if maybe by sending things in separately that confused the worker. Remember that in some counties it is each financial assistance case is handled not by an individual worker but rather by a team. And if paperwork is received by that team at different times, the chances that one individual worker will actually put all that together are lower. I would package everything carefully up together, put a little bow on it, and say this is exactly what I want. Here's why my client's eligible. Here's all the things that you need to know about this client, about their housing costs, about their rental assistance application, about their either relocation, eligibility for PCA, or receipt of waivered services, and put it all together and tell the worker, I want to be screened for MSA housing assistance with all of this in consideration.
That's helpful. Thank you.
If I might switch gears slightly and address a question that you might not have even known you had. It is about MSA and living arrangements. If you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I said there are about 80 to 90,000 Minnesotans who receive SSI, and about 31,000 of them receive MSA benefits. You might wonder, well, what about the other 50 or 60,000 people? Why don't they get MSA? Well, a lot of those folks aren't eligible because maybe they receive other benefits such as GRH, group residential housing, or what we now call housing support. If you receive housing support benefits, you're not eligible for MSA. So there's thousands of people who live in group homes or housing support settings, for example, GRH settings, they're ineligible for MSA. And But there are a lot of people who are ineligible for MSA because they live with other people. And we have a policy on living arrangements that can be very confusing for people. This might be getting in too far into the weeds. The Social Security Administration, when they determine that a person is eligible for SSI, for example, they determine what that person's living arrangement is, and then they base the SSI benefits that they get on the living arrangement. So a person who lives alone gets $735. A person who lives with others gets $490. They get 2/3 of the SSI benefit amount. This is because their living arrangement has been determined by the Social Security Administration to be shared. A person who lives on their own gets more money than a person who lives with others. Well, it would be great if MSA just automatically mirrored whatever the Social Security Administration determined, but unfortunately that's not how it works. Our current policy allows counties to determine what a client's living arrangement is and to say, well, if you live with other people, we're going to apply a much, much lower assistance standard. If you get, let's say, $735 in SSI and we determine that you live with other people, we're going to apply the $582 threshold, and we're going to say you're over income for MSA. Many, many thousands of people who are on SSI live with other people and would be eligible for MSA benefits, but for this living arrangement determination that counties make. Our current policy does not distinguish between people who live with others because they're part of a family, like a disabled child who lives at home with their parents, maybe for example. They don't pay rent, they purchase and prepare all their meals together, there's no lease involved. So we don't distinguish between those people who are part of a family and people who are just SSI recipients who are living with other people simply because they're poor. Because on $735 a month, it's hard to find an apartment, right? Our policy, current policy, does not distinguish between those. And this is a problem that I want to just bring to your attention, and I want to tell you that I am aware of it, and we're working on a change to the policy. And I want to just outline what that change might look like. Right now, our assistance standards section in the combined manual talks about what it means to live with other people. And basically we say anytime a person who applies for MSA is living with other people, we are going to consider them to be in a shared household. It doesn't matter who those other people are or what their financial arrangement is. Anytime you're under the same roof as another person, we're going to lump you together and consider you to be living together, and we're going to apply that much, much lower income threshold for the program. Now, the only exceptions to that are if the person is eligible for a waiver or would be living in a group home, like a GRH setting, except for the fact that they're living in the community, or is eligible for housing assistance, or lives completely in a self-contained unit under the same roof as somebody else, like they have their own bedroom, their own bathroom, their own living room, their own kitchen with a separate entrance. That screens out a lot of people. There are many, many people who share a home but don't have fully self-contained living quarters. And I think this is problematic because there are a lot of people who would like to be receiving MSA. They are in a shared housing arrangement. They live under the same roof as other people, but they are not, they pay rent, they have a lease, they purchase and prepare and eat their meals separately from everybody else in the home. They may have some private space in the home, but they might share some space in the home. We would like to change the policy, or I should say I would like to change the policy to reflect that reality and make more people eligible for MSA. And so what I have proposed is a change in the policy. Now, this is not a change that you can take to the bank right now. We're hoping that this will happen, but I just want to alert you to what that will be. The new policy that I'm proposing is that we would apply a living alone standard. We would pretend that a person lives alone if they were eligible for a waiver or they were eligible for a GRH placement or for housing assistance, the same things that they have now, or if they were a separate household from other people at the same address. And the separate household would be shown by proving that the person paid rent, they had a lease or a rental agreement, they purchase and prepare and eat their meals separately from the other people in the household, they have exclusive use of part of the residence, like they have their own bedroom. Doesn't matter whether they have their own entrance, their own bathroom, their own kitchen. That's irrelevant. We just want to know that they are paying for some part of the place where they live under the terms of a lease or a rental agreement, and that they're doing things that basically show that they are autonomous, that they are separate from the other people who may live under that same roof. If a client met any of those standards or those criteria, we would treat them as if they were living alone And that would make potentially thousands of people eligible for MSA who are not currently eligible for MSA. So the living arrangement stuff is a little bit tricky. One thing to remember is that anybody who is eligible for MSA housing assistance, so they've met all those criteria that we talked in detail about previously, they are always treated as if they live alone. Even if they have a roommate or roommates, we basically pretend that they live on their own. So a person who's on MSA housing assistance or is eligible for it is always going to be treated as living alone. But our new policy, if we get this to be adopted, will make people who share housing, SSI recipients who share housing with other people, eligible for MSA, where they might not be eligible for it now. And with that, I want to stop talking, and you all want me to stop talking, more importantly. So I'm going to put my contact information up here, and I think we'll take a couple questions if there are any. Otherwise, Heidi will go into her presentation.
So I'm wondering, we had a couple questions. I'm sorry, we have like weird technical things going on, so 2 computers with questions, so I missed a few before. But we had a couple of questions about just the general eligibility again. And so I'm wondering if you can just kind of do the high-level overview of how you're eligible for housing assistance again, just to kind of remind people. I don't know, maybe you need to like make up a jingle or something to go with it so that people remember easily.
No one wants to hear me sing a jingle. So MSA housing assistance, remember there's 5 requirements that you have to meet. You have to be eligible for MSA. It doesn't mean that you actually have to be receiving it at the moment that you apply, but you have to be eligible. You have to either, and to be eligible, you have to either be an SSI recipient or you have to be, you would be an SSI recipient, but for your excess income. So you have income from another source, it's still low, you're still poor, but you just don't get any SSI. So eligible for MSA. You have to be under the age of 65, of course. Remember, we talked about grandfathering, so a person could apply when they're 64 and then turn 65, they'll continue to receive MSA housing assistance. They have to have those high housing costs where they have more than 40% of their income is consumed by housing expenses, including rent and utilities. We're not just talking rent, it also includes utilities. Have to apply for rental assistance or agree to apply if the rental assistance waiting list is closed. And you have to meet one of those additional criteria that you either are relocating to the community from an institution, receiving waivered services, or eligible for a PCA. So that's the high-level overview of how you become eligible for MSA housing assistance. Is that what you wanted, Allie?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
To recap.
A little bit more about the income level. Is there an income limit for MSA?
Yes, there is an income limit for MSA. For SSI recipients, it's irrelevant. Remember, SSI recipients, we don't care what their actual income is. If they receive even $1 of SSI, we pretend that they receive the full SSI benefit, and that's the only income that we count. Any income that the person has, that an SSI recipient has, is between them and the Social Security Administration. They don't report their income, they don't report their assets, none of that gets reported to the county. All we need to know is that they receive at least $1 of SSI. A person who doesn't receive any SSI at all, is there an income limit? Yes. There are actually 2 different income limits, and this is where it's going to be confusing. There is what we call a net income limit, and that is, and there's a gross income limit. There is our gross income test for MSA for people who do not receive SSI is 3 times the federal benefit rate, so 3 times 735 or 2205 is the gross income test. If a person who does not receive SSI has income over 2205 a month, they fail the gross income test for MSA. The reason that that's so high is that for some non-SSI recipients, we can adjust their income. We basically, it's very complicated. There are disregards that are applied to some part of their income, but if you have income, you're let's say you're on SSDI and you're working, if your gross income exceeds that 2205 threshold, you are ineligible. We're not even going to look at any disregards. We're just going to say, nope, you fail for income ineligibility. The other income limit for MSA is not so much a limit as it is that we have to compare the person's income to an assistance standard. And remember I showed you those assistance standards at the beginning of the presentation? Those can change because we can add different special needs to a person's income or to the assistance standard. You could start with a $796 assistance standard, and you could add $194 for housing assistance. That brings that assistance standard up to $990. A person with income under $990 would then be eligible. You could add some special diets, maybe a rep payee, maybe a guardian conservatorship. Maybe pretty soon your assistance standard is $1,200 or $1,300, and if your income was less than that, you'd again be eligible for MSA. So I know it's frustrating to not hear me say the limit is this much money, and here's what you're going to get if you have this much money. It really depends on the person's circumstances, how much money they have in their income, and what, if any, special need programs they might be eligible for.
So was it always like this? Did this change recently? Someone had a client that was denied on an income of $1,100.
Without looking at the specifics of the case, I can't say whether that was right or wrong. I'm just going to assume that that client's income was in excess of the assistance standard that was applied to them. $1,100, unless they had quite a few special needs, would probably be too much money for MSA. Thank you.
Thanks, John. We're going to have Heidi come up now, and she's going to get into some more nitty-gritty specifics on what MSA housing assistance looks like for people in the community.
Hi, everybody. This is Heidi Sandberg, and I hope that you will find some of these case examples helpful. So today we are going to take a look at lots of different configurations of what things could be so that you can determine approximately what a person will get in food stamps, what their budget would look like, and if they're eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance. And I just want to point out that my assumption is that they meet the other criteria for MSA housing assistance, that their rent is 40% of their income, that they are on a waiver or eligible for PCA services, or that they're exiting an institution or an IRF. So those are assumptions I am making up front. So let's take a look at the first one. And what I really am hoping that you learn today and can take back with you is how to use DB 101 as a tool, because you will be able to go in and make some calculations yourself to see what your client is eligible for. If you go on DB 101 and over to the right side, if you go to the Partners tab, you will see Try It tools. And these Try It tools are quick tools, and there are three that I think can give you a good estimate in this situation. One is your SSI benefit calculation, one is MSA grant if you're getting SSI, and one is MSA grant you're not getting any SSI. So let's take an example. John does not want a roommate, at least he doesn't think he wants a roommate, and he gets SSI of $735. He meets the eligibility criteria for MSA housing assistance, and he's going to be paying $900 in rent. You can see that he is going to be eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance of $275 a month. So when you get under the choose your living situation, because we're talking about MSA housing assistance, choose living alone. And also check yes for are you getting MSA housing assistance. And I know that this can be confusing, but for these formulas to work, that's what you need to do. So John has an MSA MSA assistance standard of $796. He is eligible for $194 in housing assistance. He doesn't have any other special needs. If he had a special diet or a rep KE, those amounts would go in here. So his total MSA grant, and that's his MSA plus his MSA housing assistance, is $275. So this is what his budget will look like. His income is $1,010. His rent's $900, so he only has $110 left over. If he doesn't pay any utilities, he will get $71 in SNAP benefits. If he's paying electricity but doesn't have air conditioning, that benefit will go up to $113. And if he either pays heat or pays electricity and has air conditioning, he will get SNAP benefits that go up to $194. Now, he decided to see what would happen if he gets a roommate. So they're going to get a 2-bedroom apartment. It's pretty nice, so they're going to pay $1,200 a month in rent. His share is $600. That's still over 40% of his income, so he's going to be eligible for MSA plus MSA housing assistance of $275. His income will be $1,010. His share of rent will be $600. He has $410 left over now. Now his SNAP benefits will go down, but he'll still get $16 if he doesn't pay utilities, $23 if he pays electricity, and $140 if he pays heat or has electricity with air conditioning. So you can see that that air conditioning is a pretty big factor in increasing your SNAP benefits. So now John is going to see what happens if he works 10 hours a week for $10 an hour and doesn't have a roommate, because that might be his other option. And he's going to be paying $900 per month in rent because he'll go back to getting a 1-bedroom. His SSI is going to change due to his earnings. So you need to take a look at that. And the first step is to open the Your SSI Calculation Quiz tool to determine how his earnings will affect his SSI. So use the Try It tool. Now, under Step 1, Countable Unearned Income, don't put his SSI amount here. Only any other unearned income. And in his case, he doesn't have any. Step 2, Countable Earned Income. He's going to earn $10 an hour for 10 hours a week. I'm trying to keep the formula simple, and I'm just saying he's making $400 a month, and I know that there are actually 4.3 weeks in a month, and so this is not actual. I'm just rounding off to keep it simple. So with the disregards for earned income, and he has no work-related expenses that he can count, his countable earned income for the month for SSI purposes is $157.50. So this is going to take a look, and it's going to figure out his SSI benefit. So his SSI benefit is going to decrease from $735 to $577.60, but his total monthly income with his employment will be $977.60. Because he's receiving at least $1 in SSI, and because his rent is still over 40% of his income, he's eligible for the whole $275 in MSA and MSA housing assistance. So let's look at what a budget would look like with no roommate. His income is now up to $1,252.50, and his rent is $900, so he has $352.50 left over. He'll get $16 in SNAP benefits with no utilities, $84 if he pays electricity, and once again $194 if he pays heat or electricity with air conditioning. Now he's going to think about getting a roommate and still working. So let's take a look at what happens to his budget. His income will stay the same, and he's still eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance because his rent is still going to be more than 40% of his income. His income, $1,252.50, but now his share of rent on a 2-bedroom apartment is $600, so he has $652.50 left over. He can still get $16 in food support, even if he doesn't pay utilities or just pays electricity, and it goes up to $111 if he pays heat or electric and has air conditioning. Let's see what happens if John decides to work 20 hours a week. Then he's going to try not having a roommate. Once again, the first step is opening up your SSI Calculation Quiz tool to determine how his earnings will affect his SSI. Because remember, he has to have at least $1 of SSI to be eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance. His monthly earned income is going to be $800 a month. And so his countable earned income is going to be $357.50. His SSI benefit calculation, his SSI is going to go down to $377.60. Still eligible, and his total monthly income goes up to $1177.50. So you can see the importance of using these try-it tools to take a look at different possibilities for your clients. He's eligible for the $275 in MSA and MSA housing assistance because he's still going to have more than 40% of his income for rent. His budget's going to look like this. He's up to $1,452.50 for income. Rent is $900. He now has $552.50 left over, $16 in SNAP benefits with no utilities. Also, if he just pays electricity, and he'll get $46 in SNAP benefits if he pays heat or electricity with air conditioning. Now let's see, is he still going to be eligible if he's working 20 hours a week and has a roommate? Well, he's still going to be paying more than 40% of his income. So he is still going to be eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance. With his income and his MSA and MSA housing assistance, he's going to be getting $1,452.50. His share of rent will be $600, still more than 40% of his income. Now he has $852.50 left over, and he will be eligible for $16 in SNAP benefits, regardless of his utility payments. Now we're going to talk about what happens to somebody who is on SSDI, because we're going to talk about Jane, and she worked long enough to earn credits before she became disabled. So we want to see if she qualifies for MSA and MSA housing assistance, and we need to then use the MSA grant no SSI benefit try-it tool. So her monthly unearned income is $815. That's the amount that I used. And her total countable income becomes $795. Step 2, the MSA calculation. You put in living alone. Yes, she's eligible and she's going to be getting MSA housing assistance. It does the calculation, and she ends up with a total MSA grant of $195. That tells me that she's getting at least $1 of SSI because MSA housing assistance is $194. And remember, you need to be able to get $1 of SSI to be eligible for MSA housing assistance. So it looks to me like people who have incomes over $815 who are on SSDI are not going to be eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance. $815 for this type of income is the cutoff point. Now we've got somebody who is getting $815 in SSDI, $1 in MSA, and $194 in MSA housing assistance. Her rent will be $900. She only has $110 left over, but her food stamps will go up to $80 if no utilities, $122 with electricity, and $194, which is the maximum if she pays heat or electricity and has air conditioning. Let's see what happens if Jane gets a roommate. Her income's going to stay the same, and her rent will be $600, and she's going to have $410 a month left over because her total income will be $1,010. She'll still get $16 in SNAP benefits with no utilities, $32 in SNAP benefits if she pays electricity, and $149 if she pays electricity or heat and has air conditioning. Okay, let's take a look at Joe's situation, and this is one of the things that John referred to, the people who would be eligible for SSI because of their disability determination, but they are working and they earn too much to actually receive SSI. So Joe is certified disabled. And he's been approved for Social Security, but he is employed and he works 40 hours a week, $10 an hour, so he's earning $1,600 a month. He pays $900 for rent, so he is paying more than 40% of his income. Let's see if he's eligible for MSA and MSA housing assistance. So we're going to take a look at the Try It tool of MSA grant, no SSI benefit. And you can see that he's going to have monthly earned income of $1,600. He's got his $20 disregard. When all is said and done, his countable income is $757.50. You're going to make sure that you put living alone for the living situation, that yes, he's getting MSA housing assistance, and he's going to end up getting $232.50 between MSA and MSA housing assistance. So even though he's not receiving SSI, because he's eligible, except for the fact that he's working and he's over income, he still is going to be able to get MSA and MSA housing assistance. His budget looks like this. With work, MSA housing assistance, he's at $1,832.50. His rent is $9,000. He has $932.50 left over, and he will get $16 in SNAP benefits, regardless of his utility situation.
Versus 900.
900, right?
Not 9,000. I mean.
Oh, 900. I'm sorry.
So really upgraded.
Yeah, he upgraded to a very large apartment. I'm sorry for the typo. It's 900. Now, I really encourage you all to go into DB 101 and try individual situations to see how it looks. I think we've given you some tips on how to use those Try It tools because they're not always intuitive, but I think if you follow the instructions, you'll be able to find them very helpful. And if you have a question, you can use the live feature on db101.org to talk to an expert or call the Disability Linkage Line. They are a wonderful resource for you to use when you are wondering about a specific situation. So, do we have some questions here?
We do have one question that I think relates to the last, or one of the last examples that you gave, but you mentioned that a single individual receiving 815 SSDI wouldn't be eligible for SSI, so did you mean they would otherwise be eligible for SSI when looking at deductions?
I'm not sure that I understand that. John, do you?
Sorry, I was looking at the question over here.
Okay, they're not eligible for SSI because their SSDI is over the limit, right?
Yes, sorry, if I understand the question correctly, yes, they are ineligible for SSI because of their excess income from the SSDI program. They would, we're just looking at the dollar amount here. If the person, there was another question on the other computer here about, are we talking about all SSDI recipients?
No.
We're not. For SSDI, if they are not an SSI recipient, the person has to be aged, blind, or disabled. They have to be over the age of 18 and aged, blind, or disabled. The only exception to that for MSA, and I shouldn't say, maybe I'm going too far, is there's an exception for blind children. But SSDI recipients are only eligible for MSA if they are over the age of 18 and aged, blind, or disabled. If they are not receiving SSI, they have to be aged, blind, or disabled. And we don't apply deductions to that income. We're really just looking at, do they receive SSI or do they receive some other source of income, and they're aged, blind, or disabled. Does that answer the question, you think?
I think so. Once again, I think this points out the importance of learning to use DB 101 and the tools, because you run into situations that can be very unique and different, and we just came up with some classic examples. So I encourage you to use those Try It tools and get familiar with them, and then hopefully as you have specific situations, you will see whether or not people would be eligible. And if you get stumped with those tools, use the chat feature or call Disability Linkage Line.
So there was another question that, John, I was wondering if you could address. The question was, does MSA housing assistance exist in all counties, and is it the same policy in all counties?
Yes and yes.
Yes.
Yes and yes, it is a statewide program, and the rules for MSA are consistent. All counties that administer the MSA program have to follow the guidelines that we put in the combined manual. So if you encounter different application of the rules from county to county, if you find that a client with identical circumstances is eligible in one county and not eligible in another county, I guess we'd like to know about that so we could try to figure out what either of those counties might be doing right or wrong. But the rules are the same for everybody. It's a statewide program. MSA, I should mention, is unique to Minnesota. So if a person comes from another state and says, oh, I was on this in another state, they weren't. The MSA is unique to Minnesota. There are other states do have supplement programs for people on SSI, but MSA is unique to Minnesota. A person who leaves Minnesota, they can't take MSA with them. You have to have it while you're here, and if you come from another state, you'd have to qualify for it.
Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions right now. John, do you have any questions that came up there that you think would be good to address for the group? John's also been answering some questions privately.
No, I think I've answered all these. I think they're all pretty good.
Great. Well, feel free to keep typing, sending in the questions as we move into the next section of the agenda here. So I just have a couple program and policy updates. And one is that there is another training opportunity that we host here at DHS that's related to housing, and it is the Permanent Supportive Housing Evidence-Based Practice Stakeholder Group. That's a mouthful. And this group meets also on Mondays, and they kind of typically meet different, like opposite months than we do, so it's great to just block off your Monday and be like, housing training, it's awesome. So their next one is Monday, July 17th. It's at 1:30 as well. And the topic for their next group is peers in supportive housing settings, and how permanent supportive housing settings, and how can you integrate peer support specialists into permanent supportive housing and make them really part of your program. So I think that will be super interesting. The staff person at DHS that administers that program is Jen McNerney, and her contact information is on here, and you can sign up to get email updates on those groups as well. We also have another mental health related announcement. I guess it's more of a PSA, a reminder about a program that I think we've talked about here on these housing best practices forums before, but it's called the Crisis Housing Fund, and this is short-term housing assistance to help people with serious mental illness who are temporarily in inpatient or residential treatment, and they need to maintain their housing while they're in treatment. And I think this is a especially pertinent reminder for this topic, because if someone is on an SSI or MSA, sometimes that if they're in long enough, in treatment long enough, their income will stop. But unfortunately, most landlords don't let you just stop paying the rent just because you're in treatment. You need to maintain that housing in some way. So this is a fund that can help you do that. You do need to be working with a mental health case manager to help you access that fund. But it can help pay for things like rent, mortgage, or utility expenses. And you can learn more about it at the Crisis Housing Fund page on the Minnesota Housing Partnership website. So I definitely encourage people to check that out. It's one of those funds that we're always trying to promote because it's maybe not as well known, but it can be a really great resource for people. We have another question. So before move on to the next program and policy updates back on our MSA topic, John mentioned the standards for living independently would be changing as to qualifying for housing assistance. Would this change also potentially take effect for SNAP benefits? So the changes, and this is actually a perfect question segue into the next slide. The changes on the MSA program and the group residential housing program are just changes on the state side. So there was a bill that passed in the state legislature this year to make some significant changes to our programs. So it won't be impacting the SNAP benefits per se, but we will have some changes to our state income supplement programs. And so there are a couple of the highlights on that bill on this slide on our legislative updates. And the one that we really want to make you aware of, because it's kind of the thing that's coming up the most quickly here, is that we will be changing the name of group residential housing to housing support. And this housing support will be kind of an umbrella term. And within housing support, we have room and board payments that pay for the housing piece of someone who is receiving GRH, and service payments. So as of July 2017, like the group residential housing program there's no major policy changes, but the name is changing. So just kind of keep a lookout for that. We don't have the budget or the resources or staff to kind of do a grand change all at once. So it'll be kind of trickling throughout our materials and the manual and the website and everything as those things are updated. So we just wanted to make you aware of that in case you saw that housing support term, and to know that it is referring to what used to be known as GRH, group residential housing. It's going to be a huge change for a lot of us, and I'm sure that the GRH name will live on because it's so ingrained in people. But we really felt that talking about housing support would be more reflective of what the program is actually doing now. And in recent years, we've had a lot more people using group residential housing in the community, and it's not so much of a group setting anymore. There's more and more people that are using it independently. So hopefully that the new name will help communicate that better. We already talked about the MSA expansion and increase, so more people will be eligible because you will be eligible for it if you are transitioning from a housing support setting, as John mentioned, and the actual benefit is increasing, which is a really big deal. There's not very many times where our welfare benefits increase in Minnesota, and this is one of them. We also received authorization to get federal approval for 2 new Medicaid benefits, housing transition services and housing tenancy support. So these are estimated to start in July 2019, but could be sooner depending on if we do receive federal approval. That kind of dictates the timeline. So we'll be looking at submitting an application for those benefits in probably in the fall or winter of this year, and we'll have to go through a public approval process. So definitely keep an eye out also for more information about that process and ways that you can provide input. It will be really great if we can get that passed and we have more options for services to support people in their own homes. Another important piece of the legislative bill that passed was competitive grants opportunity that will be available if only for counties or tribes. Unfortunately, it won't be for individual providers. That's the way the legislation was written. But they could be subcontracting for providers. So if you're not working at a county or a tribe, but you want to be involved in this process, definitely get in contact with someone in your local county or tribe. And the grants are for various housing infrastructure uses. So it can pay for outreach to help connect people who are in need of housing with the actual housing, some housing navigation services. It can also be used for making connections with property managers and help building housing stock in your area. It can be used for by the counties for administrative support for training and technical assistance around housing supports. So that will be an RFP that will hopefully will be issued, a request for proposals that will be issued later this year. And the last piece of this legislation that we wanted to point out was that we also received funding for a new website or application to show real-time housing openings, probably related to places that accept housing support and have some sort of services attached to them in terms of our housing support, formerly known as DRH programs. I think we still have a lot to figure out in terms of what that will look like, but again, looking for public input on that, and should be hopefully a good tool for everybody to use. In terms of our legislative updates, these are kind of the big level highlights. There was actually even more that passed in here that we didn't cover, and we might want to go into more detail of it. So there's a chance that we'll be doing some more training sessions around that this summer. So keep an eye out for that. All right. Survey. Yes. So to wrap up, feel free to keep sending in questions, and we can either answer them on the phone or answer them through the chat. We'll stick around here for a little bit longer. And you can always, outside of our sessions, send comments or questions to our DHS Housing Options email, which is on the screen here. The presentation and materials will be available on hb101.org, and I had a lot of questions on this. So do know that we will try to get them up as soon as possible. All the past HB 101 or Housing Best Practices Forum materials are available on the website now, and we'll get this one added as soon as we can. We usually do the slides and then the recording of the presentation as well. In the future, if you want to get the materials ahead of time, I've been uploading them onto our WebEx site about a few days, so like the Wednesday or Thursday before the session, and they're available on the site that you go to when you click to register. And also, it's the same link that you use to join the conference. And there's like a little section there. It says upload material or download materials ahead of time. I uploaded them. You get to download them. So they are available ahead of time, and I'll try to make sure that people have better instructions on that in the future. In general, hopefully you like the webinar format. This is new to us, so thanks for hanging with us with some of the technical issues today. And, DHS, we're just joining the 21st century here with our fancy webinar technology. So we're still learning, so thank you for being patient. Please make sure that you complete our evaluation, and our next session will be in August. We don't have a topic identified fully yet, but we're working on some stuff we think around more engagement with landlords and how to apply for housing. So I don't see any other questions. Do you have any other questions, John, over there that you'd like to address before we wrap up? Thank you, everybody, for attending today. We hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll talk to you in a few months.